you said you were born in Taiwan?
Well, my parents are immigrants from Taiwan.
Your parents are immigrants. You were born here.
Lived in Rolling Meadows, went to Fremd High School. My formative years were totally raised locally here.
Well, I'm a Palatine pirate by marriage. So I don't know. Maybe this conversation can't happen.
I know.
Man. There's a
little
bit of a friction.
Go Vikings! Military taught me how to do tasks and get things done well. But I would say then after that, in terms of the other skills, like the sales skills, in terms of business skills, when West Point or even the military, I wasn't very self-aware. Though the military taught me how to get things done, is through self-awareness and kind of reflection. When you understand yourself, you can begin to understand and empathize with other people as well.
Hey, what's going on, friends? Jason here with the Love Local Chicagoland podcast. I'm super grateful to be here today with James Cheng. He is a local leader from the Schaumburg area, now lives here in the northwest suburbs, that has a great value set, great morals, and he's done that through a life of just wanting to do what's right for others. You know, when you hear this man's story, you're going to hear that he served in our United States military. He went to West Point, went to Northwestern, which we all know is not an easy school to get into, with the Kellogg School of Management. And then on top of that, you think he'd just go right into the business world. But instead, he has a life of serving people and being a missionary and doing nonprofit work to be able to help bring people closer to Jesus. So super excited to introduce you to him today, but I can't go any further to introduce you until I say thank you to Royal Family Real Estate. Royal Hartwig is leading the #1 brokerage in the Schaumburg area, and my guess is he'll go even further than that. He's a true visionary and a great real estate managing broker and visionary founder. So thanks for supporting the show, Royal. We appreciate you. It's going to be a great conversation. James Cheng, welcome to the show.
Jason, thank you so much for inviting me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, man, we talked about this a few times, and you know, God's into the details. So the time has come to be able to have this conversation. So probably will be the first of many if I had to look into the future, because I think the conversations that we could bring to life can truly help people like do life better. But before we dive into today's show, I just want the audience to know a little bit about you, like overall. Like, what's your elevator pitch? Who's James Cheng?
Oh man,
yeah, not that cheesy, but you know what I mean. Like, who's James Cheng?
I mean, I just considering your audience here, I think a lot of people are love local in Chicago.
Yeah.
So, my parents were immigrants from Taiwan. I was born in Chicago, Rush Hospital. My dad worked for Motorola, Schaumburg. So I'm actually born and raised in Schaumburg, Rolling Meadows. I actually lived in Rolling Meadows. Went to Fremd High School, Central Road Junior, Plum Grove Junior High. So totally, my formative years were totally raised locally here.
Well,
so.
I'm a Palatine pirate by marriage. So I don't know. Maybe this conversation can't happen.
I know.
Man. There's
a little
bit of a friction.
Go Vikings! That's a Fremd mascot.
Yeah.
You guys don't know.
Yeah, no.
I'm sure everybody knows.
Go Pirates. That's the Palatine mascot. But keep going, man.
Yeah, I mean that's Schaumburg, Fremd High School, and then I guess as you said before, I went to college at West Point, and you know after West Point, I joined the military. Was stationed at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Deployed to Iraq for a year. Went to the Philippines for 6 months, and then left the military. Came back and lived in the city of Chicago. So as everybody knows, the suburbs of Chicago and the city of Chicago are two different living styles. I can say that here. Most people who don't know where Rolling Meadows or Schaumburg is, you just tell them Chicago in general. But
yeah.
And then did the reserves in the Army, but also did sales. Got my MBA at Northwestern, and then after graduating from Northwestern, actually they moved me. The company I was working for moved to Los Angeles, so I lived in Los Angeles for 5 years. Also went to a little bit of seminary, and then lived in China for 3 or 4 years before COVID.
Yeah, man, it's that. I hear that, and I'm like, man, what have I done with my life?
What's funny is you were going over my experiences, and it is an eclectic experience, but I heard somebody who couldn't decide what he wanted to do in life and just tried to choose everything.
Right.
So.
Well, it's, I've gotten to know you. I feel like you're intentional in what you do. At least that's what I see from the outside in. There's an intentionality to what you're being able to do. And you might be doing a lot of things, but it's those things that you're chasing, you're going after to improve yourself so that you can be better for others, and that every mark of what you just talked about, there's a piece of that. I see you in the community, and I see you as a local leader. I have heard from some, say his name, Raghu Sundara, which has been to every coffee and contact for the Schaumburg Business Association ever, that when yours came about, I unfortunately missed that one, that yours was the best coffee and contacts that you ever saw. And you're not going to say this because you're a humble man, but you're looked at and respected as a leader in our community, and that has been earned, my friend. And but what I love about when me and you could go in a lot of directions with this show and a lot of different conversations. But when I was like, what message do you want to get across? You talked about just wanting to know, like, I'm local and I lived here. I grew up here, and I've gone away, but I came back. How do you think growing up in Schaumburg and going to Rolling Meadows going to Fremd High School? How do you think having that experience, going out, getting the experience Northwestern, West Point, but coming back locally, how do you think that helps you be shaped as a leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, living here in the Northwest suburbs in Schaumburg, it's a very safe environment. When you're young, you need a safe environment to grow and thrive and not be worried about whether you can eat, or if you're worried about some sort of violence that might happen to you on the streets, let's say in the inner city. So this is a very safe environment, which allowed me to explore different hobbies, allowed me to question different things. But I'm also a product of public schools. I didn't go to private schools, so so the school system here is excellent. It was enough for me to
Fremd, that whole line of schools is a great
District 211. It's amazing.
Great
you have to
district, yep.
really give kudos to District 11, what they've done in Northwest suburbs in terms of educating public school system. Saying that, though, it's a double-edged sword, because even though it's a very safe environment, what happens is you start living in a little bubble. And so when you're in the Northwest suburbs and you live this your entire life, you're kind of like, okay, this is how things are in the world. But because of, West Point is in New York, because the Army, and you lived in, like I said, Hawaii. My job is taking me to Los Angeles and China. I've done like short-term mission work in the Philippines and Africa. You start exploring and realize that, hey, what I learned when I was younger might not necessarily be true, or maybe that's just one perspective. There's other people who have different life experiences that you can learn from as well.
Yeah, man, it's really profound. I in my own way, I have that experience of like seeing what else is here. Like this is just one perspective, my own perspective, right? It's the only perspective that we have until we learn others, right? But I grew up like poverty levels in like Northwest Indiana, saw poverty, saw gang violence, those types of things around me. And then my dad worked in the steel mills and he was always laid off. It was the 80s and 90s. It was when all the manufacturing was going over, I believe, to China during that time. So just it wasn't a stable income. So he had an opportunity to go to Las Vegas and work at a place called Tymet and steel mill type thing out there that makes titanium. And my parents stretched themselves, put me in what would be a Fremd or what would be a Conant here locally. And all of a sudden, I just saw different perspectives. And now I can't unsee that, like, we all come from different places. We all have different viewpoints. And that's why it's important for us to, like, talk to each other and to seek others out, Like, I couldn't even imagine, like, even until today, I don't think I even know you said you were born in Taiwan?
Well, my parents are immigrants from Taiwan.
Your parents are immigrants. You were born here, so
Yeah.
I didn't even know that until today. So, like, knowing that you had that perspective, like growing up with parents that are from Taiwan, you have different perspectives too, but living here, right?
Yeah. Well, also, the word I think about when you talk about it is cross-pollination. You talk about flowers, the way they thrive is that they need bees to go to different flowers. And what the bees do is they cross-pollinate the different flowers so they can grow, right? And so I feel like as humans, it's very analogous to our experiences that we need to cross-pollinate. To go out and explore. I mean, there's a reason why guys are in our your teens and our early 20s our frontal cortex isn't fully developed is because if you think about it, we probably do a lot of stupid things. But what also that makes us is probably for sure. But but like in the Army, jump out of planes with a perfectly good airplane. But it allows us to experience so many different things. And so because we learn all that stuff, we can take that back and share that with other people and have different perspectives on like people's thoughts. And when you see things on the news and the politics and everything that's going on, you understand, maybe my own local experience might not be just what the reality of the world, but there are other ways that people can experience truth.
Yeah, that's really profound, man. So this makes this part of the story, I feel like, even more interesting. Especially in today's world where I feel like there's a lot of negative news around immigrants. Your parents were immigrants from Taiwan. They came here. They raised their son, but do you have other kids?
Yeah, I have a younger brother.
Too, and they raised everybody here in Illinois. And you obviously did well in school. You got into the military, so an immigrant's family got into the military to serve the country that they now live. I need to know more about this, man. What's that perspective, and why did you choose that route? I go back to respect. I think it's. You stand up and you fight for our country, whether you fight or not. But if you take that leap of courage to sign your name on that dotted line, many don't have the courage to do that in general. But now you talk about somebody that, really, you're the first generation here, right? Is that it? Mm-hmm. Now you joined in the military. Why? Why the military? Like, was it just in you? Or was it something else?
No, I mean, that's a good question. It's to be honest with you, my parents didn't want me to go to the military academy. In Taiwan, you're forced to be in the military as conscription for about a year, 2 years at the time. So they're like, when I first applied to West Point, they were like, why would you join the military? We left Taiwan, so you didn't have to do the military. I mean, because, back then, probably, going to a nice Ivy League school and was probably to become a lawyer or a doctor was seen as prestigious. Whereas you join the military, it's like, wow, you're grunt work and doing hard work. So, but I was never been somebody who really followed my parents' advice. I always kind of did my own thing. I think, you asked my motivations for joining West Point, probably not totally pure. I had a good friend who was joining. He said, hey, maybe you should just join West Point. And I said, I didn't have any plans really on what I want to do with my life. And I thought, well, 4 years at West Point and then 5 years kind of active duty work, that gives me 9 years. 9 years of my life isn't very long in the grander scheme of things. I could probably learn some stuff. So
you think it is maybe at a young age, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just knew because I've, looking in the history books, people have spent their entire lives traveling from the East Coast of Americas when it was young to the West Coast. And now we can, travel in the plane for 5 hours. So my perspective was like, 9 years in somebody's life, especially if you don't know what you want to do, and going to a place like West Point can only open doors and give you more options. And so that's always, I guess, going back to my personality is that, even though it was a lot of different experiences, I probably didn't know what I really wanted, but I wanted to keep my options open. And so West Point provided me to do that.
Yeah. It's awesome. So you went to West Point and then you served in the military or in the Army. What did you do in the Army?
Yeah. So I was a combat engineer. So what that basically means is that I had the name of engineer, but I didn't really do engineering. I basically blew stuff up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of C4. The missions of a combat, especially a light combat engineer unit, is mobility, counter mobility, and survivability. So that basically means is to help the infantry, the guys that actually do the fighting. They open up the pathways to make sure there's no IEDs, that's explosive devices or detonations or obstacles. But also because of that knowledge, if there's somebody trying to attack a base, or back in the history of engineers, a castle or a fort, they would provide obstructions so that they wouldn't be able to easily attack that. That's counter mobility. And then survivability is basically when people are shooting mortars attacks in there, you build like these kind of maybe like safe houses to make sure that you're not getting killed by mortar attacks. So that's basically the mission of the combat engineer. But also, as a combat engineer, you could also be an infantry person and also do some firefights as well. So when I picked engineering from West Point, it was really to give me, once again, the optionality of doing light fighter combat engineers in terms of like as infantry. But I thought at the time also that I could be an engineer, maybe go civil or mechanical, and that gives me an option to do that as well. So I did that basically.
Yeah. So, and you said you were stationed in Hawaii, but you served in Iraq too.
Yeah.
When were you in Iraq?
Yeah, so you got to remember when I joined West Point, it's probably, I'm a little bit older now. It's back in like the late 90s. So we weren't at war at that time. When I graduated West Point, that's when we had 9/11, and that's when we started going into war. Um, the way with West Point works that's different than like other like ROTC. It's that based on your class rank and the availability of different stations, you could choose where you wanted to go. So you literally, based on your class rank, which is a combination of academic, physical, and military, you're in your auditorium, you're like an auditorium of all the people in your branch. And based on the first person who's name ranked number one will stand up, and they'll have a little projector and says, okay, these are all the available slots you can go to. You can go to Germany, you can go to like Fort Benning, you can go to wherever. And that person say, okay, I want to go there. So, I didn't think I was highly ranked. I was like maybe a little bit above average. And so before that, they always have these like simulations of like where people are going to pick, like somebody's going to go to Korea and somebody's going to go to like, all the nice places like Hawaii and all that stuff will usually get taken first. And so I was already set that I was going to go to Korea. But when we sat up there and there was like 8 slots to Hawaii, and I stood up there and I was like, oh man, there's one more slot to Hawaii. And I'd never imagined that I could have possibly go to Hawaii. And I knew I was taking long because I remember people saying, just pick up station, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to Hawaii. So that's how I actually got it. It's just maybe luck of the draw, just
right
good
place,
enough,
right time. Yeah.
just good enough where I could just, pick Hawaii. So that's how I ended up there. Now, what happened then when we started having wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that unit in Hawaii that hadn't been deployed since Vietnam, they basically had to go to Iraq or Afghanistan and Iraq. And so that unit got deployed to Iraq. And so I went to Iraq.
As you look back, or maybe even as you were going through it, what was military teaching you about leadership, and how did it shape you as a leader that you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think in any school that you want to get in, once you get the acceptance letter, you're like just super happy, just excited to get there. But once you're there, you realize, well, what have I done? You start questioning yourself, like, did I make the right choice? Because at West Point, we had a saying is that it's a nice place to be from, but not a great place to be at. I mean, if you know the history of West Point, it's basically a fort back in the American Revolution against the North. And so it wasn't really designed to be a college at first. If you look at West Point, it looks beautiful. It got the gray walls and the parades and the green. But when you're a cadet there, it's like a jail cell.
Really?
Yeah. Just, you think about like all the other colleges, you could have been like, I could have been another college. I could have been on the beaches or, in San Diego. I could have been like partying in a frat, but West Point doesn't have that. It's, you don't have a summer. Right away in June, you have to go into basic training. And then for 6 weeks, you're basically treated like you're they call it a plebe. So which is from plebeians, which is like the lowest class system. And then the first year, you only have 4 responses. You don't even have a response. But whenever an upperclassman talks to you, you have to only answer yes, sir, or ma'am, no, sir, or ma'am, I do not understand, sir, or ma'am, or no excuse, sir, or ma'am. So yes, sir, no, excuse, sir, I do not understand. Those are the 4 responses. Anything else, then they basically don't want to hear that, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, you're like, well, that's not fair because there's probably good excuses why something happened. But what you learn in your first year is nobody wants to hear your excuses. Nobody wants to hear your reasons. They just want to figure out, accept responsibility and what's your solution. So you learn that first year is this, okay, no excuse, even though it might not have been my fault, it might have been somebody else, but you know what, we're going to figure out how to solve this and get to a appropriate solution from this problem. So that's the first place. So West Point is basically that's on this cadet development leadership system, which is your first year, you're like just a follower. Your second year, you're in charge of a freshman, maybe 2 freshmen if you're high speed. And then when you're a third year, you're in charge of 2 sophomores, and then they're in charge of, you're in charge of a squad basically. And then when you're your senior year, you're either in charge of 3 or 4 juniors who are in charge of those underclassmen, or you're in charge of a company, which you're in charge of like these different 4 groups of these seniors, or you're in charge of a regiment, or you're in charge of, that's all. That basically allows you to learn from other people, see what leadership characteristics.
Rise up, right?
You rise up, and I think that's an important idea of leadership is that you don't step into leadership right away. It's not like a magical bullet, like, oh, now I'm a CEO or something, and also I'm imbued with all this knowledge. Is that it's a gradual mentorship process.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you see people that you like and you see people you don't like. So you learn to say, okay, I want to be more like this person as a role model. there's some aspects and characteristics about this person I want to make sure that I won't ever have to follow again. So that's what you learn as being a follower first and then leading after that.
Yeah. No, I for sure can see that. I think back when I was, immature in age and in spirit, and like, oh, I could do that job or whatever. Maybe I could have did the technical aspects of those roles, but to be able to lead people, to be able to build teams, to be able to do those things, like I was so not ready. It was more like I needed that mentorship, that training, and I didn't get that from the military, but I got it from other ways. And I think mentorship is key. Like if you could learn from people that are better than you, that could also help you with your blind spots, and you could do those things in turn for them, like it's a game changer. You could learn and grow so darn quick. And so I love it. You brought that to the surface.
Yeah, and just adding on to you asking, what did I learn as well? Angela Duckworth wrote the book called Grit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she talks about West Point. Yeah. So, it's funny when, you're 17 years old, all right, to 24 years old, you're kind of like, why did I do West Point? Because like, I could have had a social life or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But now 20 years looking back, you realize you do learn that kind of resilience. You learn like kind of perseverance. And then, that's what a lot of that military, I wouldn't even say necessarily West Point taught me that. I would say the military does that because, when you graduate West Point, that's just kind of like what I say, like it's in West Point, necessarily not everybody's dying, right? So it's kind of like a simulation. When you're in the military and you're actually in charge of 27 to 40 guys who are all probably older than you in experience, you're a 21-year-old leader and you have somebody as young as 17 years old to somebody as old as 35 years old, and they're calling you sir, right? And you're their leader. You're not really necessarily leading them because they have more experience, but they're trusting you to give them direction and some sort of purpose on why you're doing these things. So kind of that idea of like, the military taught me how to do tasks and get things done well and maybe quickly, maybe efficiently, and then time management. But I would say then after that, in terms of the other skills, like the sales skills, in terms of business skills, taught me probably the social aspects of subtle, nuanced body language communication, that where the military guy says, let's go and get it done. Sales and business kind of taught me like, okay, what is this guy saying?
There's a finesse there, right?
There's a finesse, yeah. There's a refinement because like somebody's maybe saying something like, I'm not that interested, but their body language says, well, they might be a little bit interested. So how do I kind of peel and pull that thread to say, okay, what about that they're interested in based on their body language to get me to negotiate or talk to them about something that they're interested in, so that it's a win-win situation when we talk about certain outcomes. So.
Yeah, man, I love that. I love that. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that I remember
just one more.
When West Point or even in the military, I wasn't very self-aware. So I remember I had this question about emotions. And I remember this, after like 5 years in the military, like, what's the point of emotions? Because like, it doesn't help you get anything done. Like, even if you cry about something or you're sad about something, like there's still the problem there. And so, it just, I don't see what the purpose why God created as humans, why we have emotions. As I got older, and I wouldn't even say that as an MBA, I actually went through seminary. So it's a seminary at a place called Biola. They had a master's program called Talbot. And within that section, niche called spiritual formation, which is basically taking theology, psychology, and philosophy and combining it together and making it practical. So for instance, like in the Bible, it talks about like, don't be angry. If you're angry, your brother will commit murder. But like, it's not like you can control your anger. Like your anger, your emotions is a symptom of a need not being met. And so what you really should be asking yourself is,
or a perspective that isn't understood.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so you should ask yourself, okay, why am I angry? What is it that's causing me anger that allows me to manifest itself? So you can't really control anger. It's asking the question, I'm angry right now. What's going on?
Yeah.
And so why I think that's important is that though the military taught me how to get things done is through self-awareness and kind of reflection, meditation, but also a little bit of schooling to understand, like giving words to articulate, man, emotions are important because without emotions, I had a professor at Talbot say, basically, the less you're aware of emotions, the more you'll be controlled by them. And so I think that's huge in terms of leadership, but also in terms of how do I understand myself? How would I control or be influenced myself in the professional aspect and personal aspect, but also in the family? But also when you understand yourself, you can begin to understand and empathize with other people as well. You know, because if you're going through hard things or they're going through hard things, sometimes you look at the surface like and they treat you, maybe they cut you short.
How it feels. So you
You're just
have
like, oh
some
yeah.
empathy, right?
Well, there's one point where you're just like, man, they're just jerks, right?
Yeah.
Or you can mentalize and empathize, like, man, they must be going through a hard thing for them to treat me like that. And then you can give them grace instead of saying, I'm going to be a jerk back at them. You can say, man, maybe I could talk to them in a softer level and says, man, they're probably having a hard time. You know, either leave them alone or maybe I can ask questions a little bit more and probe them to build that relationship.
Okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Is
know?
everything okay? Right.
Yeah. I love that you say that. And to me, self-awareness, I haven't always had. It wasn't, I think I thought I had it, but I was missing many pieces of it. And my brain tends to go really fast. So there were certain parts of my life where I would come off angry to others. I didn't have a lot of patience with people, like in managerial roles, because I thought everybody's brain went as fast as mine. And once I learned self-awareness, honestly, through my faith, I couldn't be self-aware before because it hurt for the things that I saw, so I stopped going after those things. But what my faith for me and my story with it, to bring context maybe for anything that you have to say with it, is my faith helped me give that grace for myself and allowed that humility to kind of come into play. From there, it was okay to be self-aware and like, shit, I got to work on that. Or if somebody gives you feedback, not to be defensive, but to be like, wow, thank you. You know, I had a boss that said feedback was a blessing. And now I look at that. Now I want to surround myself with people that'll give feedback in a kind, candid way, right?
Well, and I think that's important to be in community. So what happens is when you're by yourself is that you think you're like, oh, this is how the world works. This is how I am. But when you're in community, people, how they react to you reflect your actions. So you can't really necessarily see yourself unless you have a mirror. And so that's why it's important to have the Bible, but also important to community is that your actions influence people, but then their reactions can give you feedback on how they're experiencing you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and having an operating system, you know, for us, Christianity is a big piece of it. You know, I also use Stoicism as a tool to help me become more self-aware and calm in the moment. You know, a good buddy, Carl, he's been on the show before, but he talks about like the waves of life and how you got to ride the waves. And, you know, it's, I over the last, maybe it's the 40s, maybe it's COVID, but being able to ride, getting to a point because of self-awareness, because of the things that we're talking about, to be able to ride these waves, but in stillness, it's smooth. You know, it's the waves are moving up and down, but you're going. I look at myself before, and I would allow those waves to take my emotions up and down with it, right? But when you can stay like content, and maybe stillness isn't the right word because you're moving with the waves, but you're at peace when you're moving through those waves of life. Life's more joyful, and you could do more things, especially when you're in a community of others that have similar beliefs, right?
Yeah, similar and also different beliefs.
Yeah,
I mean, if you have a safe environment.
Glad you said that. Yes.
You know? So, because when you're in a similar beliefs, it starts getting into groupthink, but you want people who have differing beliefs because you got to understand, like, where's their perspective? What's their experience? Maybe they're seeing something that at a different angle that I'm not.
So this isn't on the script, but let's keep going on that, right? So talk right now in this time in history, it's so important to talk to people with different beliefs and with same beliefs. Like we have to seek to understand each other and where each other's coming from.
Correct.
You know, from my own perspective, I have neighbors that have different beliefs than me that I know are really good people. I have been there and had my back and my family's back. We have different beliefs during this time in history. I say it, and people have heard me talk about this before on this show. We got to talk to each other, because if we don't, we're gonna mess some things up, man, within our communities, and our kids may be impacted if we can't look to be able to seek one another's viewpoints, and then to be able to look at like how can we create a win-win, you know, and I hope we could do that, but it's something that's important that in this time in history. What's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Seek other people's viewpoints, but I think it's also a little bit harder if you don't understand maybe the dynamics that go into the conversation. So, for instance, like you and I have some sort of relational equity. I know your personality. I know you a little bit more, so that when I create an opinion that might be differing from you, I realize that you're not just going to walk away from the relationship. But there are, we all walk around. This is the psychology. Is basically we all have these masks. This is kind of like our false self, our pose, our shadow self. We have an identity that we want people to like us. Part of being community is that you have people that have similar interests, and you're part of this tribe. The problem is that that's not the reality of who you are. There's an authentic self, and Brene Brown talks about it.
Yeah.
It's just basically revealing your vulnerability. There's your weakness, the things that you're ashamed of.
She's also been a part of my healing process. Faith,
She's
but
huge.
Brene Brown's books. Yeah.
So the only when we have authentic connections is when we reveal who their true selves are, which are the things that we are vulnerable, which means the things that we're ashamed of, and also the things that we're willing to speak on that might cause people to disagree. We only get there when we have a relationship that we can trust and know that this person, first of all, if your priority is to be in a community and to be part of this tribe, then you don't want people to reject you. So we're always afraid when we meet people about whether we accepted or rejected. Once we build relationship, which takes time and it takes intentional questions and intentionality, and realize that person's personality and their characteristics, you start building trust. And when you start building trust, then you can start talking about things that are truly who you are. Because in the end, we all want to be accepted. We all want to be our authentic selves.
We all want to be part of community, right? We all want to be a part of something.
I think that's human nature. It's human nature. And the
feels better as a
problem
human, 100%.
The problem with being online, this is our social and the ways of the time, is that we think that we're in a sort of a community. But the problem online is that we're always showing people our best selves. We're always showing people the things that we want them to see. Versus when you're with somebody all the time. I love what Tim Keller says when he talks about marriage, is that, after a while, when you're with somebody for 7 years, they call it the 7-year itch, is that you just can't pretend anymore. So when you're with somebody all the time, you just have to be who you are after you've gone to the toilet, or maybe you're not feeling your best days when you're sick. So, the reality of being people seeing one-on-one is that there are things that are communicated that you can only do in person that can't necessarily be communicated online or communicated through a DM, right?
Yeah, totally. And, especially as the world evolves, like community online is one thing. But to me, and we talk about a lot with Village Networking, it's the connection. It's the air game and it's the ground game. And the ground game meaning you're connecting with people in the community, whether it's a church, whether it's a networking group, whether it's a women's group, whatever it is for you. Connection with people on the ground. Then the air is different. We could tell more stories. We could bring more stuff. We could bring us together. But that connection on the ground is, to me, what we're all yearning for as humans, and that we need. And I didn't always know that, but COVID helped me really realize that, like, well, we're a lot better together. And I was fortunate enough to be in a community of a leader that was already kind of instilling those things in place. It just took me to COVID for me to realize exactly the power of what a strong community could look like with diverse opinions. And when you could come together, when you could talk to each other, when you could try to seek to understand one another, life is just better. And even in the crap with things, and you could do life more joyfully, right? At least that's my experience.
I think it gives purpose to life too. I mean, just because when people talk about
maybe that's where the joy comes from, but yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, because everybody's always seeking, we talk about happiness and joy. So when people are always looking for satisfaction, looking ways to entertain themselves, but really joy comes from this deep desire of I know that where I belong, and I know that I'm accepted no matter if I'm perfect or not. And I think that's all intrinsic into human nature. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important.
So what's your advice to people out there right now? Like, I want to talk to people about some of your past and the missionary work that you've done with churches and nonprofits. But like right now, as we sit here in the middle of a revolution, let's call it is what it is. What's your advice to the community right now, so that we could focus in on making stronger communities long term together?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I want to go back to that analogy before I answer that, because the analogy you gave us in terms of waves, right? About how your emotions are affected by different ways, if it's up or down, stuff like that. I brought me back to Hawaii. I grew up here, so I never surfed, but in Hawaii, I picked up surfing, and surfing is awesome. Okay, I love it. If you have never surfed, go surf. Okay, so
I've tried and I fell a lot.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of falling a lot. It's a skill set, right? But what I like about surfing is a nice philosophy in terms of life, because in surfing you have a paddle and you got waves, right? It's not like you can control the waves. You can just paddle out there as hard as you can, waves are crashing over you, the whitewash is crashing into you. But when you get to a position where the wave is supposed to just crest over, when you're in that position, you just ride the wave, you enjoy that wave. And then once you're done, you come back and do it all over again. And I believe that's a cycle of life, is that you work hard to be in a position where you can see a wave that's coming. And when the wave comes, you ride the wave and enjoy that wave, and you do the cycle all over again. So it's a cycle of going back and forth, and just, you have nothing else to think about but just catching that wave.
And sometimes there's going to be struggle within that cycle when you're trying to be able to either wait for that wave, or whether you got to it a little bit late, so now you're chasing, or whatever that is.
No,
there's struggle. There's struggle in that circle.
The struggle is necessary to get to a position.
Yeah.
So you have to go through struggle. It's part of that. Even the Bible says that. It's not that you're not going to avoid struggle. It's that when you struggle, when you go through trials and tribulations, this is what you should do. So life is about struggle.
So on the Bible, we could go on a lot of things and go on that question, but the Bible, I'm learning a lot this year. We're doing the Bible in a year, but I'm using ChatGPT for the Old Testament to summarize it. Where I always struggled. I'm not read like you. I didn't have the seminary experience, so I've always struggled with the Old Testament. But within the Old Testament, the common themes that I'm seeing of is God puts people in tough positions, in hard positions, to be able to overcome things, and He teaches people things within these things that sometimes they needed to be able to learn so that they could do His work, right? And I mean, I could say probably more on that, but I think that's a big piece of it. But the question that I asked before, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. So going back, okay. So back to the surfing analogy. So, it's all about perspective. Like, one person sees a storm and they're like, wow, I'm not going to go out there because it's dangerous and I could die. But somebody who's accustomed to the storm and see the waves and knows what to look for, they see that and says, wow, that sounds like an amazing exciting time to go out there and enjoy the waves. So it's about perspective. So going back to community, is that you have an opinion and a perspective. Somebody else has a different opinion. What it goes is to understand, where did they come from to logically come to that conclusion. And it's by asking those questions and understanding them. And you only build relationships through interaction, through this idea of this back and forth between people. And in the Bible, it talks about iron sharpening iron, right? And when you sharpen iron, though, sparks fly. But once those sparks fly, that iron is able to get sharp. And so what that means is that there's going to be some heated conversations. If you're truly passionate about something, you're going to have things that are going to be contentious, especially if your identity rests on this certain thing. So let's say if I was I don't know what to say. Like, let's say, okay, let's just say, give me an example. I'm not a doctor. Well, let's say my identity was a doctor, and I went through this great school, and everything about the doctor in the medical field is correct. But somebody comes back to me in the medical field and says, let's say, the sugar, right? We believe in the food pairing. We said sugar doesn't have any calories, and it's a net zero, so you can put as much sugar as possible. 60 years of that, and you come back and someone says, sugar is actually bad for you. And let's say I'm the sugar king. I'm like, well, shoot, I've wasted 60 years of my life on sugar, and now you're telling me it's wrong? So this is what the perspective we're talking about. It's like, let's just say even you and I, like Christianity, okay, we have that as our perspective. By the way, I wasn't a Christian. I was a Buddhist before, and I became a Christian after college. But let's say Christianity was not real.
Story,
right? Yeah, so it's not real. And we say, hey, Christianity is totally debunked. There would be a part where it'd be like a little defensive and be like, wow, I've just spent the majority of my life believing in this faith, and all of a sudden somebody say it's not real. There's going to be some sort of defense behind that. Now, maybe it's not religion. Maybe it's something about the government, how the government works, or politics, how the politics work. There's reasons why people believe what they believe. And I think if we all come together and give people grace and understand them a little bit more, you can say, okay, I can understand that, but I can respectfully disagree, or give their respective perspective.
Not to get political, but your sugar analogy is like the oil. It's a very similar type analogy.
What do you mean by oil? Say that again.
So like oil, like that's something that we've had for so long.
Oh yeah.
And the other side, Democrats want to do less fracking, those types of things, where we're going to do more drilling with this administration. We're going to do more. They want that. They're not letting go of their sugar. Sure. I think that makes them a lot of money. That's kind of what I meant by it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. And I think what happens then when especially in the political scene, in the political realm, you start realizing people's priorities might be different than yours. So like even going back to oil, like some people are more concerned about protecting the environment. That's a priority for them. Other people is like, well, we have all these things that run on oil. That's a big more priority in terms of getting capital running versus protecting the environment. So these are you realize that when people have different priorities, this is where the disagreement comes at. Nobody's disagreeing that we need to protect the environment, but then the other says, "Well, what costs does it happen when we protect the environment? We're not able to have people run their cars or run their gas stoves or whatever they may be, right?"
Yeah, and I don't know how this is done, but that's why it's important to build a win-win. And in order to build a win-win, both sides need to be heard, and their perspectives need to be seen, and the work to be able to build a common agreement is important, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree. It's two ways to go there. You can go right between the where you disagree upon, but I always look at where the commonality is to build a relationship first, because my priority is not always
how you go further.
Well, it's not necessarily, it depends on the person too. If it's somebody like you, of course, then I'm focused on, hey, I'm going to see you every day. I'm going to focus on building a relationship, even though I may disagree with your politics or disagree with whatever you may say. But if it's somebody else who's never going to affect my life at all, then, maybe we're not going to build a relationship. And maybe this is where we need to have a debate online, because other people are influenced by other people's opinions. Yeah. So it depends on, I think it's contextual.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I think we could go on that, especially as you talked about the online piece of it. But let's save more of that part of the conversation maybe for our next show. I want your. I didn't know
if you'll have me back. I don't know. Maybe this is my first and last time here.
You'll be back, James. But my thoughts in just even hearing that you weren't always a Christian, that you started out being a Buddhist and then you became a Christian. You went to seminary. You had the experience that we talked about with the military, with college. You became a missionary, and you went to, it was China, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about like your mindset on why you did that, and what was your reasoning. Would be the first question that I have.
Well, I think, when you love something, you want people to hear about it, right? So, if you love coffee, you want to tell everybody about coffee, right? Back when CrossFit was big, I still do CrossFit, but how do you know a CrossFitter? Is because they don't shut up about it. I mean, that's the thing. It's like when you love something, you want to tell people about it. And so that was the thing for me, is that my faith is that, I just knew China was a place that really controlled religious freedom. They didn't have freedom of speech. And honestly, a little bit of cultural is that I wanted to go back to Taiwan, learn Chinese, because I grew up here. I didn't speak Chinese. I'm just English, my first language. So there was always that shame part we talk about, is that, people see me as Asian. Yeah. I should be able to speak Chinese, but I don't. You also have to realize, so, for one, I wanted to go back to Taiwan. The other part, though, was that my company that I was still working for said, hey, we have an opportunity in Beijing to be a manager, and we need somebody to be a manager there. So if you know the political situation between China and Taiwan, is that they don't see eye to eye.
There's friction, right?
There is definitely friction. Yeah. So, even by saying that I'm from Taiwan and trying to separate myself from China, that can be seen as wrong, because China sees that as one China. Now, I'm married to a Chinese, she's from mainland. So I love China. I actually never thought I'd leave China. And so, it's funny to me when I come back to America and it says, oh, China's all bad, there's all these things. But like, I lived in China, and you have a different perspective when you live there and you see the people there, and you just say, this is just a different idea of what they're living through based on their environment and how they grew up. And so when he said being a missionary, it was to work there in a different environment. I've always been somebody who's been more international.
How old were you at this time?
This was around 34, 35 years old, maybe 36.
Awesome.
When you get older, you just forget your ages. Those numbers become...
it all blends together.
That's right. That's right. I think we're eternally 29 now.
Right? I'm 27 eternally. So 29 for you, we got this, man.
Yeah, exactly. We're vampires. No, but so on the surface, though, I was working a legitimate work. But my passion was to share with people that normally wouldn't hear about the gospel and hear about Jesus Christ, because I really loved, in my experience, just changed my whole trajectory in life.
So how did you get to that point? Like, where you were a Buddhist, how did you get into Christianity? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism was mostly cultural. Like, my family's from Taiwan, so you would have every lunar New Year where you would pray to your ancestors. You would give these the incense and everything like that. So. And then even at West Point, I was actually part of the Buddhist club, and which is really, honestly, like Buddhism. There's so many different facets of it, but one of it's not necessarily considered a religion if you're a Buddhist. It's more like a philosophy of life. So you don't believe in a God. You believe that this is how you should live. This is that idea. And so when you go to the Buddhist club, it's really searching for purpose and meaning in your life. And so I was part of the Buddhist club at West Point, and the president actually of that Buddhist club became a Christian and asked me to become the next president of the Buddhist club. So that's just my background. And how I became a Christian is that when I went over to Taiwan after West Point, just to learn more Chinese before I got into the military, my classmate was from Chicago. I did gymnastics in high school. He did gymnastics in high school. He went to, I believe it was Mundelein, and I went to Fremd. So we actually had like these shared experiences from halfway around the world. I didn't know this at the time, but he was going to University of Illinois Chicago and also in the Fuller Seminary. And so he's studying to be a pastor to start a church in Taiwan. I just knew he was very funny. I thought our humor was very similar. We did, a lot of our jokes were very similar. And so he was just sharing with me. And then one day, we were in Taipei and we both like to work out. And there's a random guy in Taipei that recognized him. I guess he hadn't seen him for 5 years, but knew he was studying to be a pastor. The guy had schizophrenia. He was taking pills since he was 5. He was 35 years old at the time. For over 30 years, pills to help with his schizophrenia. So he asked my friend to pray for him. While he was praying for him, I felt something in my heart. And so nothing in my experience could explain that. So after he was done, we went to a McDonald's and I just said, hey man, when you were praying for him, I felt something in my heart. He's like, I know, have you read the Bible? So he gave me the New Testament Bible and I read that within a week. And, I'm not like I understood everything, but to a point where I said, okay, July 4th, 2001, was it 2001? Yeah, 2004. Yeah. And I said, there's got to be one God. Once I said there was one God, I just felt this peace come over me. Now realizing, you're going into somebody who was like in high school trying to do well, at West Point trying to do well, very best performance-based validation. And to know that there was a God to like handle things, even if I made mistakes, there's a peace that can it just goes over you. 3 weeks later, he talks about, fasting. This is the idea of not eating, abstaining from food. And he talks about like if you desire to find some sort of truth, you can fast. And so I'm a newly minted military man. I can fast for 24 hours. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to fast for 24 hours. So I'm on the treadmill in the gym. I hadn't eaten, and now I have pain in my stomach. And so I'm like, man, I've got so much pain. I haven't eaten in 24 hours. I'm starting to pray just to get my mind off the pain. And this random dude comes up to the thing next to me. He speaks perfect English. He's in Taiwan, remember? And the third question he asked me was, are you religious? And I'm like, well, I just started believing in Christianity and Jesus Christ like a couple of weeks ago. He's like, yeah, I know, I can feel it. Turns out he was baptized by the same English-speaking pastor in Taiwan that I was going and attending. So this whole time I'm asking God, like, are you real? Are you real? And then here's the two random incidences where you can say, well, it's coincidence, or maybe God was arranging things where saying, hey, there's proof of my existence. Now, I missed the most important part. Now, at West Point, I'm in the Buddhist club, and they force you to have a certain haircut. So they have barbers there that cut your hair. And one of these barbers, we would just jokingly call Jesus because he had a long beard and a Bible on his desk. And so, of course, I get him. He's cutting my hair and he asked my name. He says, oh, my name is James. He's like, there's a book in the Bible named James. And I'm thinking in my head, oh, great. He's going to try to like proselytize. I mean, I don't want to hear it. But he just said, hey, it's a very short Bible. You should read it. And so when I left that barbershop at West Point senior year, I'm like, my heart just started getting like a little excited. So that night I said, God, if you're real, reveal yourself to me. Waited 10 minutes, nothing happened. So I graduated West Point and being like, well, there's no God. 3 months later, I'm in Taiwan and I'm like, there has to be a God. And then 3 weeks later after that, I said, had that experience with that person asking me, saying, yeah, I know that we're going to the same church randomly in Taiwan.
I was just telling you it's on my time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's not just, you can once again see this is all coincidence or there's God and you're aware of it. That God's doing something in
the
my
dots
life.
Connect, we all have our own story too, and but the dots connect, and to me, if it's about allowing it in and learning and seeking, because it's great principles that help you do life better and more joyfully.
Well, and I think that's why it's important. Self-awareness is important, because I could have gone through life and just said, oh, that's cool, random dude just talked to me, I'm going to move on, right? But like when you're self-aware and you're like, okay, well, I know I can't make that happen. I know where my abilities start and end. And this is where we talk about miracles, is that, I know I can do a certain thing. Let's say I can only work at a certain pace. I know that the deadline's coming up and I'll do my best, but there's no way I can make this deadline. But all of a sudden God changes something and all of a sudden you're able to make that deadline for some reason. This is where like you can see, like in one sense on the surface, this is just coincidence. Another sense and deeper is like, wow, I know that wasn't me. That was something bigger than me. Right. So
yeah, no, man, I feel blessed. I think for me, I probably came in my early 30s too, and got through Carl, she's a pastor at our church too, a good friend now, as well. Kind of brought me back to Jesus. I was always was raised Catholic. This was my grandfather's necklace, some miraculous metal. But, when I look back at like really a low point in my life, it was that 2012, 2013 point, and getting to Jesus for me it was life changing. And I'm saying this because it's the timing, because sometimes people give up or don't go to it because, oh, God's not speaking to me. Well, maybe you're not speaking God's language because you're trying to run and control it all. At least that was my experience. Once I let God in, once I made space for him, my life changed, and he connected dots that I could never have imagined, including this Love Local thing. The gratitude you have for that is huge.
For sure. And just my thoughts too. There's so much things I'm thinking about. But
we can go all day.
I always find it interesting, people who are raised Catholic or in a Christian environment, because sometimes I was raised Buddhist. And so for me, when I came to faith, I really had to look at my life and be like, okay, what do I really believe? Sometimes people who come in the culture of Christianity, Catholicism, there's like, okay, this is life. And they never really had to come to faith and say, what do I really believe, and make it my own? So every aspect, in many ways, we all have to decide, is this real? What's real? And what's what I really believe? And I sometimes feel like sometimes people who grew up in church are like, well, this is life. And, they never really had to come to that faith of like, my parents did it, so I do the tradition, to a point where like, oh, is Jesus real? Is God real? And you have to do that and go through that crucible to really decide, okay, this is what I'm following or not.
Yeah. It was back to community. When you're around people that, in my experience, that could help you understand the words of Jesus and how they're brought into life is better. And the things that the way he lived when he was here on earth was, if we could all take a note from that, not only are we going to live life more joyfully, we're going to create a better environment for our kids as we continue to evolve too, right? So I think we could talk on that all day. I want to hear about your experience.
One last thought.
So we're going to go at this. Keep going. Go.
Okay, one last thought though, is that there has to be a point, like when people are questioning their faith. I mean, a lot of parents, when their kids say, okay, like, why do we believe in this? Why do we believe this? Like, each of us has to go on our own journey on deciding what we believe, because you have to provide an answer to people who have those questions. So like, why is Jesus real? Or even the questions of universalism, which is like, if there's a God, why does he allow evil in the world? Or why is God, all loving God, allow killing? Like, you have to answer these questions to yourself and have a good enough answer to say, well, a good and loving God still exists, even in a fallen and broken world, because of this and this and this. So when we start talking,
he's here. He's telling us we're sinful by nature.
Well, so this is why we talk about. So this is we talk about moralism. Is that okay? When you do good, this is basic physics, right? This idea of you do something, equal opposite reaction happens, right? So you do good, you get good back, right? But I do think that Jesus kind of talks about like, hey, no matter how good you do, there's still bad things that are going to happen to you. No matter how many good things that you can overcome on your own, you still can't do it by yourself. And this is why we need Jesus as Savior, is because he can come in there and be there for you, with you, even though you're going through the problem. He not may solve the problem, but he's building something in you inside that's going to last forever. So, anyways.
He's telling you life is going to be struggle. Look to him and his principles. And through that, even through those struggles, there will be light. Right?
That too. Yeah. Yes. Well, and that's why you find out who you really are. Because like, if everything was all nice and easy, then you would never have to discover like, what do you really believe? But character is formed through struggle, through hardships and trials and tribulations. So like, when you say, I want to be more patient, you just can't just say, I'm going to be patient. You have to go through a line.
I want to be more patient. God, I was patient for 5 minutes. Where is this?
That's right. Or you're in traffic, you need to get somewhere, and all of a sudden you have to, you're supposed to be there in 5 minutes, but it's going to take you an hour. Okay, where does that really, what do you really believe? Like, are you going to be able to say, okay, I'm okay with this, and accept the consequences of that, versus like, I have to get there as soon as possible because I got to make it, right? So, but character is formed. That says in the Bible too. It's just many times, through trials and tribulations, your character is formed. And so you form your character through struggle and resilience, and that's how you build the patience and character through that. So you have to go through struggle. That's all I'm saying.
That's a part of it. So you're in China. You're working as a manager, and you're a missionary. I've never interviewed a missionary before. Talk to me about missionary work and what does it look like?
Well, it depends on your definition of missionary, right? Because like in many ways, if people ask me in China or anybody else, like I was doing legitimate work. So if the government even questioned what I was doing, I was there as a sales manager and leadership, taking care of several people. So But on the other days, I knew why I was there is in terms of building community, giving hope to people who were, on only families. You have a one-child policy in China, right? So there are a lot of pressures in the people that are our age who only grew up without a sibling, without community, with China. It's all about going through ranks and trying to achieve something. So a lot of people would go through a good school and then get a good job and get a good salary. And by the time they're ready for family or community, they've already in their mid 30s and they're like, okay, what do I do now? Right. So, so in many ways, like I guess the traditional sense of a missionary is that when somebody goes to another country, they have to figure out a way to either raise money or they have to be part of an organization or they have to either look for a job somehow. Right. But I already had a job. And so I was blessed that way in terms of earning an income, but also that I could also do whatever I wanted to do there because there's a real reason why I had to be there. So I would say this though.
How many years were you there?
About three and a half. And I just fell into a community that I loved. I mean, I felt the community that I loved so much that I married somebody from there. That's all. So I was single when I was there and then she's there and now she's back here in America with me. So, but I guess missionary work, I guess is you got to understand purpose in life because you can go through life through this cycle and just kind of this hamster wheel, trying to make more money and achieve higher goals in life. But in the end, you have to realize, okay, looking back on my life, what did I accomplish? And it goes back to the 5 regrets of the dying. You've heard this?
Never heard that, but I believe in purpose.
So her name is Bronnie Wary, I think. Okay. Bronnie, she's from England. She's a palliative nurse. Basically, she would interview patients who are on their last years and they're going to die. So they're in their 70s or 80s. They have maybe 6 more, 12 more weeks before death. And she would ask them the same question, is there any regrets you have in life? And after 3,000 patients, she wrote an article in The Guardian, but also she has a book called The 5 Regrets of Dying. There's 5 regrets normally that people have. And one of those regrets is basically like, I wish I didn't work so hard. I wish I didn't say yes to everything. I wish I didn't try to meet other people's expectations. I wish I stayed in close contact with my friends and relationships. I forgot what the 5th one was, but nowhere does anybody say I wish I worked harder. I wish I earned more money. Yeah. It's always about relationships. It's all about community. It's always about these things of taking more risks, being daring, not trying to just fall on the same little hamster wheel. So
yeah, I've lived a part of my life just going with the flow. Thought I was supposed to do what I was supposed to do, like in corporate America, that type of stuff. But I was not happy in those spots. I was more in a darker spots. I think one, I didn't have the faith piece there, but I also. God has something in each of us that we're supposed to do, and we all have a purpose within us. But some people, because of fear or whatever other reasons, can't get there to live out what they think their purpose is. And that's hard, right?
Well, it takes self-discovery. Yeah. It takes an idea of hey, what do I really believe in? I mean, once again, it's setting around.
And you might not like what you get on your way there. You might not like everything along the way on that discovery path, right?
Correct. And that's why people self-medicate through social media, through alcohol, through entertainment, is because they don't have to think about that. And they're just sufficiently entertained. We don't have to think about the deeper things of life. But it takes quiet time to really think about that, but also in community where somebody can ask, and somebody who's also been on that journey to ask you those questions like, what are you really doing? What do you really love? What are the things that you hate? What are the injustices do you want to overcome? It takes that type of person to do that because not everybody, it's a lost art actually being community. Back in the day before TV, all that stuff, you sat with people and that's how you were entertained, talking to people. And now we have such many different ways to entertain ourselves that we lost that art of the community.
Yeah, and we're yearning for it, I feel like, as a society, whether we know it or not yet. Yeah, but we're yearning for community because we are more fulfilled when we're in a community. We feel better. We go back to the heart thing. Usually when we're around people that we know, love, and trust, that do the same for us, our hearts feel better. Right?
They felt on fire and it makes us passionate about what makes life worth living. And that kind of wants me to going back to this introvert and extrovert thing. Because, Jason, you and I are both introverts. You may not notice that about myself, but
we just don't like small talk. Introverts might not. We can talk. We just don't like small talk.
But also, when you're around a lot of people that you don't know, it's draining, right? Whereas extroverts, they thrive on that kind of thing, right? But I also want to think that self-awareness is important because, my wife is an extrovert, but she doesn't like to be in big groups because she's anxious about how she is perceived with other people. So having that self-awareness to parse out okay, am I really getting life as an introvert, or am I just anxious because of my experience with bad relationships before?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say with my wife that she's an extrovert because one of the things is that she can't just stay at home all the time. She has to go out. She has to meet when she meets somebody that she trusts. She wants to meet with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, yes, we want deeper talks for sure. We don't want small talks, but I would say that, there is a gradient of that. There's not just a binary, I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert, but there's a gradient. Like I can be at home all the time and I'll be fine,
Mm-hmm.
but there are parts where I have to go out for like an hour just to be in the world a little bit.
For sure.
So going back to what you're saying, community, is that we all still need community. Now, whether it's one person or two people or it's 20 people, we still need some sort of human relationship to interact with us, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. So that's why I want to say that. That's what I was bringing up there.
Yeah, no, that's you're so right, man. So a couple last questions as we continue to get wrapped up.
Absolutely.
So we talked about this a little bit, just about the power of the next generation, and as we go through this time in history as Americans, the focus in on our children, and mentoring and guiding them is really, it's always important, but it's really important right now. What's your thoughts on why it's important for us to double down on mentoring and helping our youth?
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying that raising children is that they're not taught, but it's caught. I would even say that's leadership, is that you can tell people and talk about all the different principles of leadership and what they should do and blah, blah, blah. But that culture, that leadership, that child, they're going to catch it by observing and seeing firsthand whether or not you really believe what you believe. So your actions speak louder than your words, right?
Yes.
So you being a role model first, a role model is important for that. And that's human nature, is that we observe other people and see what they do. We compare each other to other people. That's just the human nature once again. And so it's important, especially as a young generation, especially when I was younger, is that I would see my community and be influenced by those people that are around me. You're influenced by the five closest people that you're in contact with, right? So I think it's important because there's gonna be a time where we're gonna be old age, Jason. Sorry, man. We're not gonna be 29 forever.
It's happening
and
as we
we're not
speak.
gonna be in the position of influence. And leadership is about influence. And so the people that you mentor, if you want to make a world a better place, you have to influence those people to see that in their perspective so that they can grow and be in charge of that. We're in that position where we are in charge right now because we've been taught by the generations before us.
Yeah,
so
it's
important.
It's our job to teach the next generation, and there's a lot of Bible talk in this conversation, so keep it going. But it was Ecclesiastes 2 or 3. It's generations come and generations go. You will not remember. Future generations will not remember you, just like you don't remember past generations. But the evolution of us still continues to go on. So to instill values and to instill morals, let the good foundational pieces for our kids and for our youth, so that whether it's technology or whatever, AI or whatever else it is, as it continues to go, we look to those things. We look to the heart, because so that we could have a more prosperous, future that we'll never see.
I mean, in the Bible it says that our life is like a dew in the morning. It comes and goes, and by the afternoon it's gone, right? So I mean, but we're also affected by 4 generations before us. So you may not know this, but you're affected how your mother and father were raised, and they're affected by their parents and their parents before them. And so your great grandfather, grandmother affects even how you are now.
Yeah,
So,
and you look at that, and you look at the craziness in our society that's there, and people are like, "Oh, buckle up and just get by your bootstraps, do things right," but they don't understand that this generational trauma that is in there has impacted them either directly or indirectly, right? You can look at the African American community; the trauma that has gone up there is still in the kids that were born, that were still in there. The trauma's in us, right? It's about healing through that. And working through how can we offer more perspective.
Well, and I think that's why it's important to be self-aware about that.
Yeah.
Like, what are you affected by the things that you're hurt in your past, right? Because if you're less aware about that, then you're going to try to do things to either avoid or overcome.
Yeah.
And so that's, whether it's an African experience or even the minority experience or whatever experience, we all have our own experiences.
There's a lot of them. That was the first one I thought of when you said what you said, just from a recent story that I heard that I never thought of. It was more that our body keeps the score. So, buckle up yourself by a bootstrap. If your life was born and you were born into like a normal, wealthy family and all those things, of course you got your own problems to deal with, but that's going to be different than somebody that comes from poverty, whether no matter who they are and what race they are. You learn things, especially when that's generational poverty. There is trauma that's instilled you that you have to overcome. Faith helps those types of things, going back to the self-awareness, but it's more to overcome. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm thinking like it's perspective.
Yeah.
I think it's perspective. We all go through hardships, whether you believe in it, whether the wealthy or
For
the
sure.
poor, right?
Oh, all of us do.
And so
Yes.
I think you got to parse out, okay, what is something
to have
that's
grace for one another's perspective is what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Yes.
And I always say this, you got to parse out what is cultural, like my environment that's raised me, versus what's generational, but also what is intrinsic to the human experience. Because in the human experience, like we talked about, just we use community, for example, like we all desire community. We all desire to be part of a tribe. That is intrinsic in human nature. Now, how that manifests in the culture is that, do I do that with, through dance? Do I do that through reggae? Okay. Or do I do that through like
Podcasting?
Podcasting. I guess that's the one. Like, there we go. Right there. There's the community here. But that's the point, is that the self-awareness piece and discussing it allows it to say, okay, is this something that's part of my generational trauma, or is this something that's cultural, or is that intrinsic to the human experience? And it's complex, but also when you have people who can articulate that well, it helps you kind of be aware of that, and also then be able to be more in control. I wouldn't say you're in control of anything really, but you're able to control your attitude. You only control two things really, is that your attitude and your response. You're only in control of your attitude, how you see something, and your response, how you respond to some sort of external factor. Everything else you can't control. So I can't control what you think. I can't control what you do in behavior, because unless I was a dictator and I could some sort of kill you, but in other ways, like, you're still going to behave a certain way. Sure. And so I have to let you, this is maybe back to a seminary, is that maybe a little bit of Eastern philosophy, is like everybody's on their own path. One of the ways that was talked to me when I was in the Buddhist club was that, let's say nirvana or achievement or enlightenment is this top of the mountain, but everybody's on this different path towards that. So even I would say with my Christian friends is that just because somebody doesn't believe what you believe, allow them to be on their path and guide them to what you believe. But then they have to learn to live on their own, but also the consequences of their decisions, and be okay with it.
And just and allow them to be that, but you said it earlier, to like ask questions, and to make them, when you ask questions and you don't try to give a rebuttal back, and you just let people sit with their thoughts, it's life-changing, and it's been done to me. I didn't even know it was being done to me, but I was healing through those things because those questions made me look inward, and it goes back to that self-awareness that you talk about, right?
Yeah, and it shouldn't be hard.
It's part of the human experience if we allow it.
Agree, exactly. So you shouldn't be afraid of hard questions. So it goes back to my Christian friends or people who grew up in like Christian culture, is that when you start questioning God, it's okay. Because for me, at least, because I've done the research of what I believe in, is that when you start digging through things, you're going to find out the foundation of your belief. And if you believe that God is real and the truth is real, then you're okay to excavate all the cultural stuff out of the way and find out what's truly true that really is important to not only their life, but also what's important to God. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, is that okay with the hard questions, allow people to ask that question. Don't get so defensive. If you get defensive, then that's for you to ask yourself, why am I being so defensive of this point? And so that's the self-awareness piece. It's an opportunity to go on a journey in your own heart and yourself. That, so whenever I experience some sort of uncomfortableness and some sort of like anger or emotional like trigger, I have to stop and say, okay, why am I so triggered about this? What's going on inside me versus that?
Because it happens to all of us, right?
Every day. Even I understand this. Every day I'm like, wow, I'm angry right now. What is going on?
I walked into a meeting the other day for a board I sit on, and I had an energy from somewhere else. And then I immediately, the room captured me. I got kind of brought back to earth, and I would realize, oh, this is my energy. That was brought into this. This is kind of just what you're saying. Like it starts here, it starts at home. I need one sentence from you to wrap this up. Okay. What is your words of wisdom to the community during this time in history? One sentence.
Oh man, no, I didn't know it was one sentence.
Maybe two. I'll give you two. Right?
Words of wisdom for the community. I think there's maybe if I was, back to my past, because I'm from this community. I grew up there. I went on this journey, and then I'm back. So you can almost say in terms like this idea in the storytelling, it's like the hero's journey. You go through those stuff, you come back a changed person. I think, and I'm still changing. And I think that's the advice I have with everybody, is that the humility to understand that each day you don't know everything, and each day to learn and develop yourself. That anybody you learn, even though everybody you come in contact with can teach you something. And so I think it's just this idea of self-development that you're always learning, you're having that growing mindset, because that growing mindset lets you become a better leader and lets you be a better influencer and a positive influence in this community. So
Yeah.
that's my advice. Just continue learning all the time.
Yeah, that's great advice, man. Well, I appreciate you doing this for the first time. There will be more.
We'll see how it actions. People are gonna be like, no more of him.
I promise
It's okay, guys.
people like it, and it'll continue to evolve over time, James. But you're great, man. I've learned a lot from just this conversation and being a friend with you the last couple of years. So I look forward to continuing our friendship and spreading love as we continue to evolve. So
thanks, Jason.
Appreciate you.
Thanks
brother.
for this journey. Thanks for the journey, but also this opportunity, and also I like to see what's going to happen with your journey as well. I mean, we're all going through this journey.
Thanks,
Where our
man.
paths connect, we can walk alongside this journey. When it comes out, people are walking their own path.
We're all here and then purposeful, and hopefully we can align and make a stronger tomorrow here in our local community. So,
I agree.
I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, man.
My friends, hope you enjoyed the show. We didn't, as introverts tend to do, we didn't have small talk, but I hope that this show brought a little bit of light into your day, my friends. Through a great operating system for us, it's Christianity, Stoicism. There's some Buddhist in there too. Life could be more joyful and full of impact, especially when you're intentional about what you do and you look to be able to lead with a giving mindset. My friends, we're stronger together as community members. Sometimes we got to go in and work on ourselves first. I know I've had to do my share. I do it on a daily basis, and sometimes it sucks. But self-awareness is key, especially in this time in history when the people that are smaller than us are watching. So have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Support local, love local, stronger together. Peace.